Talk to you tonight about a roughly thick 6,000-year-old problem. The sort of notion of living in paradise, getting expelled from paradise, and trying to return back to paradise, and trying our best to try and recreate this paradise. We have incredible paradises on our planet, but yet we constantly are pushing it away and destroying it to build more and more to enhance the way we live. We're programmed at an early age to build. Does that look familiar? We build since, this is my son Hendrix a couple of months ago, we build and build and build, but we're wondering, is there a way to build and build in kind of an enlightened way? I had tried actually building out of garbage. That was a fun experience one summer, building a house which is called an earth ship, and packing tires, which comes in handy if we keep going down the road we're going. Here's our friend Wally cleaning up Trash Planet. But if you Google the word paradise, it's all about nature. It's all about being immersed in nature. There's no buildings there, or if they are, they're very small bungalows. And this is what we really love to do. We love to be in nature. We love to enjoy the beauty of the place. This is in Aspen, Colorado, one of those beautiful areas. My son, a little younger. The slides were coming. So the idea is, how can we, in a way, deal with the natural resources, deal with the beauty of the planet in a new way, an enlightened way, and to embrace nature, sometimes very closely. This is mountain climbing or rock climbing, and hopefully not get killed in the process of embracing nature. I feel that we've sort of reached the end of a certain way of thinking, and these projects, in my mind, are the culmination of the wrong direction. And what I'm going to try and show you today is little bites of what we're attempting to do around the world in order to rethink the way that we've built over the last thousands of years. This is a very, very small project that we're doing, but I think quite interesting because it's a project that is a gateway to the last remaining natural landscape in the city of Miami. It's about 2 or 3 acres. That's all that remains of what was natural in the city of Miami. And Miami is an incredible place because Miami is the only city in the country that is surrounded by 2 national parks. Everglades to the west and Biscayne National Park to the right. But yet, we have very little left in terms of in our city. But this project establishes a very interesting relationship between the built environment and the natural environment. And in many ways, I like to plant more trees than build buildings. And what we're trying to do is juggle these things, to juggle projects that are good for the planet, that are good for people, because I think in many ways, architects, especially at the highest end of intellectual thought, forget about the human condition. It's more about incredible dynamic form and not necessarily about creating pleasure, as well as balancing the notion of economics. These projects have to be built. They also need to be successful. So it really becomes this incredible juggling act that we need to keep at. That wasn't me. I can't do that. This is the first series of projects are really inspired by the notion of framing nature, of framing the beauty of place. This is actually our house, and it's all about the garden and framing the garden and creating an optimized lifestyle within the Florida environment. But the outdoors becomes the focus. And I think some of this idea of framing and the relationship with the garden actually relate to my time spent in Japan, living there, working there, and exploring the gardens and the relationship of architecture to pavilions. And then these are other projects in Miami that explore the notion of framing nature, of actually reinterpreting nature. This is a laser-cut screen that actually is somewhat of a camouflage because it's taken from the existing landscape beyond. This is another project that begins to frame views of the sunrise and the sunset and of the bay in downtown Miami, even though this is on Miami Beach, as well as another project that creates outdoor rooms to enjoy nature, as well as a rooftop with a pool to also frame the sunrise and the sunset. So the notion of nature is very, very important. We then began to work outside of Miami in more natural environments, more sincerely natural environments, and began to see how we can make the buildings blend with their environment. For me, some reason Miami architecture wants to be white. And funny enough, when people ask us to go to other places, they think we're going to do like white Miami architecture. But in fact, we try to always use the materials of the place to make it a more organic relationship. In the first house we showed you, the stone there is actually coral rock, which is the stone of what's beneath the surface. So this is a house in Colorado that is attempting to blend with nature using local materials and making the tones merge with the surroundings. This is a house we just finished near that other one, also in Colorado, that is utilizing the local materials. This is the stone from the neighboring mountains, as well as the recomposition of old barns. All the wood is like 300-year-old barn wood. But there's also this idea of framing nature. This was an existing house, a little cabin, that we inserted these very large portals or frames of the view. So you see one here and one here. These were special windows as well as one here. These are special windows that actually had to be brought in from Germany because they were so large. This window is over 9 feet tall and 9 feet wide and a single pane of glass. Something fun when you're working outside of Miami is to be able to use big glass. And here you can see the framing from the master bedroom of the 14,000-foot peaks that surround this town, as well as another framing of nature and the integration of the wood both inside and out. And here you can get a sense of the scale of that window. Another project that really focuses on the notion of framing nature is a project we worked on with 7 other architects from around the world on a private island in the Turks and Caicos. It was a really exciting opportunity for us because we were the only architects from the United States and some of the only ones without a Pritzker Prize. So it was a little bit intimidating. And to make matters even more challenging, we actually were the only people not with a beachfront property. So we took that as a great challenge and decided to actually align the buildings very simply as the most simple geometry we can find, really perpendicular to our site, but that allowed us to frame the sunrise and the sunset. So the building becomes a portal to celebrate the rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, as well as the moon. So the materials that we're really building with are the ethereal materials of sky, of nature. The colors of the sky are what's important. The architecture, in a way, should disappear, but it allows you this unique experience because it's elevated above the trees or above the swamp, which was, from marketing purposes, called a nature preserve, but it was actually a pretty marshy land. And then up above, the house actually has a swimming pool, which actually devises that shape. But the house is reduced down to its essence. It's only a very pure frame. Everything is reduced. The materials are kind of very raw. This is actually reclaimed wood that's intended to be bleached, made to go gray from the sun, and then concrete with the same sort of board form proportions. And the house is just very, very neutral. This is actually the culmination of the house, and in a way, what the house was set up to do. And that is to create this view of the sunset. And this is from the rooftop pool. So in fact, the most important moment of our architecture here is when the architecture completely disappears and sets up this incredible way of reinterpreting or relating to nature. This is a funny picture, this is a rendering, but this is actually a picture of the sunset in the Turks and Caicos that I took a few years before we started working on this project, as my wife took me there for my birthday. So this idea of sitting there and celebrating the beauty of the sky, I mean, there's nothing we can do as architects that can compete with the beauty of the world around us. So what we're trying to do is find a way to help you celebrate and reframe and refocus one's attention, you know, from Blackberries and iPads and iPods to the beauty of the world that actually is around us. We had a beautiful sunset, actually, while we were circling around, lost in the parking lot. Funny story, many people have kind of seen that project and wanted us to make their houses like that. This is a house that we're doing in Los Angeles. It was a competition that we won for the movie director Michael Bay, who many of you might know, who just did the last Transformers, or so he says, the last Transformers movie. And he not only wanted one of these, he actually wanted two of them. So this is 2 master bedrooms, but yet Michael's single, so we wonder how that works best. And then there's a very large theater in the middle, but the house is actually embedded within the mountainside. Another house that focuses on framing nature is a house that we're finishing up on the island, Harbor Island in North Eleuthera. It's about an hour from here. And one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And we actually wanted to try and figure out how to, once again, reduce the house down to its essence. Unlike the Turks and Caicos, which was an island that had a lot of kind of very aggressive modern architecture, Harbor Island was the capital of the Bahamas, actually from, I think it's like the 1700s. So we wanted to kind of create an architecture that fit in and that did not stand out, but wanted to do something that was, in a way, timeless and eternal. So we created 2 piers that the house sits on a dune, at the top of the dune, and we created 2 piers that hold all the bedrooms as well as the kitchen on the right side. And then just a very simple roof, very simple shape. And the material is all the materials that they use on the island. This is cedar shake. So the idea is that the building will completely weather and become something that is, in a way, a bit of an enigma. Is it old? Is it new? Is it, you know, from 300 years ago or 300 years from now? So the idea is that it's something that will also disappear within nature. We're planting more trees because many of them were destroyed in the last hurricane. The house survived intact. But this becomes a temple to nature. You walk up these stairs and get up and see. You hear the ocean, but you don't see it. And then when you get up there, you're just like, pow! You know, this idea of creating a very impactful relationship with the beauty of the ocean. Another project that deals with that is a house we're working on in the island of Mustique. This is another very interesting island. David Bowie, Mick Jagger, many celebrities, Tommy Hilfiger, they all have houses here. This is actually a private island, so you can rent houses, or there is even a little hotel. But the idea was to create a very primitive house, utilizing local materials, volcanic rock, and once again reduce the house down to its essence, to really create the simplest, most elemental way to celebrate the view. And the reason the house is so long, this house is 100 meters, or about 330 feet long, because that is actually the only place you can see the view on the site is at the top. So it actually runs the entire length of the top portion of the site. Getting into some more urban projects, this is a project in downtown Miami, and here we actually wanted to kind of filter the view. We created a natural environment on top of this existing building and a village around the pool. This was a historic building, and then our building kind of relates around it. At a larger scale, a project that we completed in downtown Miami is a 50-story building. It's also about, once again, framing nature, this time at a very, very large scale. I'm going to have a fascination with buildings under construction. I think buildings under construction tend to look a lot better than buildings when they're done. So our idea here was to really create the most simple architecture possible, one that was a fusion of the structure that needed to be there, the optimal orientation of the apartments. As you can see, they're sort of shifting so that you enter 2 apartments on one floor and then 2 on the other. These are all duplexes. The abstraction of the scale of the building. This is actually a 50-story building. I don't know if you can see, but there's a guy there, a little dot. And it's quite interesting because it sits within a neighborhood of some very massive buildings. And this is really the most delicate and kind of elegant of the projects there, just because of its size and its kind of clarity of form. So the building is a very simple expression of what is going on the inside. It's only what you see. It's slab and glass. So it's a very, very pure relationship between the architecture and the structure, so that you get these incredible moments to celebrate the beauty of nature and the sky and the water. I mean, the moon is setting. I actually take this ride home every day to the beach. This is overlooking Miami Beach. And the idea is that there's nothing to interfere with what you're seeing in terms of the beauty of the natural world. And then on the rooftop, you have gardens that frame the sky, the reflections. I mean, these are the things that fascinate me. And the architecture is set up to kind of focus in on those by reducing it down to its essence. This is the structure of the building. I mean, there's nothing else except structure. And that also helps when you're building in Miami, especially because developers are pretty cheap. So anything that can be taken out will be taken out. And therefore, if we can't remove anything, there's nothing to remove. This is another project in Miami. This is in Key Biscayne, where the buildings were glass boxes and then surrounded by wood shutters that create very interesting shadows, but also privacy between adjacent buildings, because there's a bunch of these towers on site. And each one of these towers is actually 1 unit per floor. So there are sort of stacked houses of the sky, but you can see how they begin to interact with nature and the kind of beauty of those moments that are surrounding us at all times. This is another project that we just won a competition in Brooklyn, and in this case it was also thinking about structure, about framing nature, about kind of connecting to the place, creating a very, very sincere relationship to its context. This project's in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I'll show you a little movie that we did. This was a competition that we won in May, or maybe at the end of May they announced it, or June. And Williamsburg, I don't know if many of you know it, but Williamsburg is actually right across from Manhattan. It's actually closer to downtown Manhattan than it is to Central Park or those areas are to downtown Manhattan. But it's also the place where all the cool people of New York move, because they feel like New York is not cool anymore. So it's very edgy, it's very hip, it's very exciting, and also very, very raw. So we wanted to actually create a really straightforward building. Our client bought this and the adjacent site. And he was a guy who actually wanted to create a pretty big impact. So we figured out the simplest way to extrude the building envelope. So this is actually what you're allowed to build. And we created the building in a series of segments that is really very, very simple to build. We're actually utilizing the skin of the building, which you'll see in a moment, as the structure, as well as the technology that was used in the 1800s to build the bridge. So the building operates at 3 different scales. It operates, this building is actually taller than the tower, but becomes, in a way, the 3rd pier of the building. This middle building actually relates to the bank in a very, very kind of simple and elemental way. And then the lower building relates to the immediate context in terms of tone, materiality, and scale. So the building has kind of 3 scales and 3 relationships to its context and to the surrounding views. But the building is also set up to optimize views. This facade actually has a lot of depth, and that depth allows one to kind of see diagonal views of the city. You can see the project as you're coming across the Williamsburg Bridge, and you can see how the building is actually made similar to the bridge. It's a superstructure made out of steel. And here you can see from the street how the building actually becomes the third pier of the bridge. And here you can see the building from the side. These are very delicate proportions. This is an expanded metal facade that gives the building solidity, but also allows one to have transparency through the facade. And then you can see the facade, which is not decorative at all, although it becomes kind of an interesting pattern. This is a very intentional form that allows us to actually pop the view out, similar to a cockpit in a plane. The facade actually has a great amount of depth that allows the bed to be kind of thrust out into the sky. And what you see here is actually steel. This is actually the structure of the building as well that resists the lateral forces. So you see here, kind of in detail, this very kind of deep facade that actually gets thinner and thinner as you go up the building. And then here you can see how the building and the beds are sort of thrust out so that you're overlooking the entire city. It should be a very, very powerful experience. The rooms are actually incredibly small, so you have an incredible opportunity to really be pushed up against the glass. Another building that explores that notion of structure is this project that we actually did in Miami but never got built. It was a casualty of our last economic crisis. But it explores also ways to work with steel in a very, very efficient and kind of expedited way. The idea is to build faster, to build cheaper, and also to build in a more exciting way. So here you can see the building with this superstructure out of steel. Our office is actually through there. This is the Miami Design District. I've also had, at an early age, a fascination with sustainable energy. I became interested in architecture at the age of 7. My parents decided to build a house in New Jersey, and I sat with the architect at night sketching with him as we tried to extract my family's dreams into a house. But they actually wanted to do a windmill in their neighborhood, and for obvious reasons got turned down. But that kind of initiated my fascination with wind and wind power. That culminated in a project, also a casualty of Miami's economic crisis and real estate, of a project where we integrated wind turbines into a structural skin. This is also an exploration of structure, in that this skin is the structure of the building. It's a kind of 10-inch concrete frame. And then on the roof, we create a garden that is framed with these portals, and you're framing the sky, and you create this kind of very otherworldly experience of sort of high-tech, low-tech gardens, eating the trees, there's fruit, and so forth. Also exploring the idea of bringing nature back into the city is a competition we won to design a hotel in Washington, D.C. that would serve to be the first green hotel brand. And here we began to explore, how do we get the original nature of Washington, D.C. back into the city? How do we bring more greenery back to the project, or at least replace the vegetation and the natural landscape that was there on our site? So sort of a one-to-one replacement. So here we have gardens in the back, on the walls, on the roof, internal gardens as well. So that all of that replaces what was taken away many years ago, because this project was built on a site of actually the old Nigerian embassy. And how we can kind of work with systems, some high-tech, some low-tech, to create a building that is as little impact on the planet as possible. Other buildings that explore the idea of framing and creating courtyards is a house that we're working on in Switzerland, utilizing all local materials from the surrounding mountains, and you can see it almost becomes part of the surrounding mountains. Old wood, in a way similar to the house in Colorado, but in this case creating courtyards. And actually all this is not there. We're recreating the natural environment, the native species that were there. In a way, many of these projects start from the idea of how to create the optimal garden and the optimal way of appreciating this garden through the architecture. It's almost like a negative way of thinking or a reverse way of thinking. Like I'm thinking the first thing I do, like how do I create great views of nature? How do I create amazing gardens? And that's where the architecture sort of comes from. So here you see the sort of framing of the surrounding mountains, the framing of the beautiful reconstructed nature that we're doing, and then the use of all old materials. We always try to use reclaimed materials, old materials. We feel not only is it beautiful, the materials have soul, but we're also doing less impact on our planet and the resources we have, the limited resources we have. Here, once again, the framing of the views. This is a solar-powered onsen, or a hot spring, and then a little microcosm of the surrounding mountains. This is another project that we're working on, also about courtyards, also about creating moments for nature. This is a hotel that we're doing. I can't tell you for who, but maybe you can figure it out. In China, and it's a way of taking a very, very simple form and kind of transfixing it into a series of 4 courtyards, 2 interior and 2 entry, and in the back. Oh, we're back to here. I guess we inserted that slide. Another project that deals with that relationship with nature is a resource center. We're working with Pharrell Williams, who's music impresario, sort of a Renaissance man, and we're creating a center for children to explore their maximum potential. This is in Virginia, and there were some existing trees, a grove of trees, actually some of the only trees that were remaining in this area, and we decided to make a tree house for kids to kind of go and escape and explore and really use their imagination. Pharrell felt honored as a child to have people who kind of supported his artistry, and he wants to repay that by building this resource center for the neighborhood where he grew up. Another project in Miami that is framing nature is a building that we hopefully will build one day in downtown, and we also are recreating that natural experience on the roof. We took the entire site and elevated it up there to actually create 2 ground planes. One at the bottom, where it was all more commercial and private, with shopping and entertainment, and an entire garden or an arts quad, because it's a university building. And then there's another ground plane about 40 stories up. So the idea is it's actually an extrusion of the entire site, and then we carved away at the areas that were unnecessary due to the different programmatic elements. So we optimized the building for the various programs. So here you can see the building sort of framing the Freedom Tower, which is our Statue of Liberty in Miami, where many of the immigrants came in the beginning of the settling of the city. And then, as you can see here, the garden, the landscape, the arts quad, creating this elevated plaza because the whole street is activated with retail. And then everything has to actually circulate through. There's museums, libraries, auditoriums. And then on the roof, there's another ground plane with pools and gardens, as well as full solar hot water for the building, as well as hundreds of vertical access wind turbines. But the idea is to get up there and to appreciate the view. It's always about how do you create this experience that always connects you back to the beauty of nature. This is another project that also begins to explore ways to create more nature or replace the nature that would have been there, even though it wasn't in this case. This is a project, a competition in Dubai, that we lost, but I really love the project, so I show it at any rate. We didn't really want to create a building, we wanted to try to create flora and fauna that existed, and asked ourselves, can we create more habitat that was taken away? So we start with the building in a kind of very straightforward superstructure, and then extrude the building up and allow for more gardens, more terraces, and more space for nature to permeate and to create more nature. So all these openings are gardens in the sky. The building actually creates a little bit more native landscape and native habitat than it existed on the site before. So here we're exploring ways to get actually a little bit more nature, as well as create an incredibly wonderful habitat for people to live in as well. So the idea here is you have these great apartments in the sky, kind of dissolving into nature, and these wonderful habitats for the flora and fauna to exist. As well as create an armature for wind turbines, as well as exploring tidal power as well, because there's an incredible surf. This is actually known as Surfer's Paradise. That's the name of the city. We also started working in more protected areas, and we asked ourselves, can we make the building almost completely disappear? And we looked at how nature cloaked itself, how nature camouflaged itself, as well as the way primitive civilization used the local materials that existed, local landforms, and the idea of how to integrate both existing form and existing nature and the built environment. So we looked at sort of these very primitive fields, these rice fields that were done for centuries without any tools, and we thought that this held some sort of answer for us. What we realized was it wasn't about the architecture. The architecture should, in a way, completely disappear or attempt to disappear. And what is more important in Costa Rica is the nature, the flora, the fauna. I mean, this is what you find on site. These crabs that chase you on the beach, the monkeys are flying around the trees, toucans. That's why you go to Costa Rica. You don't go to Costa Rica for incredible architecture, but hopefully the architecture can help you see the incredible nature. So in a way, it's not like we're creating a zoo, but we're trying to create a new lens, a new way for people to kind of see the beauty of the place around us. We also wanted to use local materials. Costa Rica, fortunate for us, has an incredible amount of volcanic rock, which is super cheap and actually very, very common. We also want to use old trees, fallen trees, old barns, utilizing all the old wood that is around there without actually destroying the forest. And we began to realize that beyond the flora and the fauna and the use of natural materials local to the habitat, this was what we were really interested in. It was the atmosphere. These were the materials. They're free. They're out there. So if the architecture can be very, very simple, very, very pure, it'll heighten the experience of the place and heighten your connection to the atmosphere, to the mist, to the change of the sky and the cloud formations and the reflections on the water and the rustling of the trees. These things become the star of the experience and not the architecture. In a way, we try to have the building disappear and be overpowered by nature, similar to the way the temples in Cambodia, which I finally had the experience to firsthand a couple of months ago, going to these temples that have been abandoned and then overrun by nature. And this is what we're trying to create in a new way. So the building is completely blended with the environment. Everything is built below this mesa except for this one structure. And everything is green roofs, providing habitat for all the animals that were on there. And the building is set up to enjoy the sunrise and the sunset. There's a spa that's kind of embedded within this kind of natural depression. And the building utilizes very primitive but also some sophisticated green technology, but ideally tries to use as much passive kind of techniques as possible. And then you can see, or hopefully hardly see, I mean we had to show something, but the building kind of barely visible. And that's because it follows, similar to the rice fields, it follows the contours of the land. I have a very, very hard time generating arbitrary form. For me, I can't create a shape or a line or anything without questioning it 1,000 times. So I've come to try to have these lines, these forms, these shapes always have some sort of purpose that can't be kind of overruled or in other directions. So these forms, which look quite beautiful and seductive, are actually derived from the contours of the site. This is the site. It's not me creating some sort of interesting shape. It's actually the contours and the topography of the site. And then what you're left with up top is this temple to nature that's blurring the boundaries between foreground and background, connecting you to the world around you, and helping you frame incredible moments and incredible vistas. The buildings are all built around existing trees so as not to destroy what was there. And then one of the villas, reduced down to its essence with screens that close up and allow one to create this sort of indoor-outdoor experience that is very, very powerful and very, very pure. One of the last projects I'm going to show you is moving into a bit more of a harsh environment. This is not Mars, although it does look like it. It could be it because it's so foreign. But this is actually a desert in Jordan known as Wadi Rum. What's fascinating about this location is this is in a way where many episodes of the Bible have taken place. Not necessarily this particular site, but around this area. I mean, it's sort of the start of many of Western civilization. And yet, it's this incredibly harsh environment that people have lived in for thousands and thousands of years. Just to give you a sense of scale, it would take you about 5 or 6 hours to walk around our site. It's a little deceptive because these cliffs are about 700 feet tall. So it's an incredibly powerful nature, and we spent some time, getting to know the natives, having fun out there. It's really about the people, it's about the place. We really bonded with the locals. This guy bonded a little too much, but we realized that we can create an architecture that was once again reestablishing the balance between man-made and natural. So here you see the entry pavilion that is a very, very elemental slab that is actually supported by existing rock outcroppings and creates different ways to frame both horizontally and vertically. Here you can see the framing of the sunset is over this area, as well as the framing of the mountains, the rock cliffs that are above you. But it's a very, very simple architecture. It's a very raw architecture. It's an architecture that's actually made out of the materials. All the sand is mixed with cement and rebar to create this very kind of crude and very powerful architecture. This is also where you go to get on your camel. I don't know how many of you have ridden a camel before, but it sounds more fun than it actually is. After about 5 minutes, you really want to get off. But that's actually how you get to your room. The idea is that the project has sort of primitive technology. We don't want to use electric. We want everything to be as it was thousands of years ago. And what's fascinating is that these civilizations, the Nabateans, there's actually a city about an hour and a half away known as Petra. I don't know if any of you have seen it. You might have seen it in Raiders of the Lost Ark or one of those franchises. It's one of the wonders of our world. It's an entire city that's carved out of rock. And what's fascinating about that culture is how they actually harnessed water. I mean, they didn't have running pipes, but they had actually very sophisticated and very primitive ways of harnessing the rainwater, which allowed them to live in this desert. Because it did not rain a lot, but when it rained, it flooded. And they were able to kind of capture these things in cisterns. We're making this cistern, and actually this cistern becomes a part of an experiential chamber of a spa. So in a way, it's a little bit inspired by the Pantheon, but a little bit more crude, a little bit more kind of primal. But what's interesting, I think, is that there's no, even though we don't have power, it's an incredibly luxurious experience because it's not a 5-star hotel. We were kind of joking, it's like a 1 billion-star hotel because you're out there and you're looking at the stars and you're really connecting to the place, to the culture. The people are incredible. This gives you a little bit sense of the scale of the cliffs. These are some of the suites that are actually outside of the rocky area. And we created these very kind of powerful walls that are made of earth, made of rammed earth, recomposed earth, similar to the way these are. That's why they look the same, because it's the same process. This happened over millions of years. This is happening over more years than we want, because the project is on hold at the moment due to the political unrest in the Middle East. But the idea is that you create a kind of very serene, a very kind of powerful experience, one that is sometimes silent because it is blending, but also allows one to frame and focus. So there's a kind of constant theme here. This is actually aligned with the sunset. As you can see, I have very limited tricks. It's always kind of a similar thing, but in a kind of new way. This is another part of the project that is also about framing, about finding the simplest geometry, the most powerful form, and in a way the most silent experience, because this building actually flows with the rock and the kind of formations of the rock there. This is an area that's carved into the rock. This is my favorite part of the project. As you can see, at night you can see it, the candlelight, but you can't see. My son's very excited because he camped out here for a couple of nights and loved it. So, and you can see that the building is a series of caves, in a way completely primitive but also futuristic. These shapes were derived, we actually got some geological and geotechnical studies of the rock, and we modeled the rock in the computer, what we got, and then used the tessellation of the rock to generate these forms. So there were sort of existing crevices and other things that we began to kind of take advantage of. Once again, form not being arbitrary, but actually based on engineering as well as kind of existing geological compositions. And what you get are a series of hotel rooms, right? I mean, I don't know many times if you've stayed in a hotel room like this, which are these primitive caves. Everything is carved out of the rock, even the plumbing fixtures, and you get this incredible vista to the surrounding landscape. At sunset, the building kind of ignites, and you can start to see the sort of life that goes on and the kind of nature of this primitive yet futuristic architecture. This is another project we're working on currently, also in the Middle East, and we're trying to create this notion of a silent monumentality. These are rooms that are embedded in the landscape. We wanted to make sure that when you were in this experience that we did not change the landscape. Similar to the other project, everything is as hidden as it possibly can. And the only thing visible in this project is actually the entry into one of the components here that is this very dynamic form that is actually carved further. That entry piece is over here. And we create this project's actually by the coast in the Persian Gulf. But we create this very, very dynamic, very, very powerful and monumental architecture that is in some ways primitive and in some ways futuristic. So this question of style disappears. It becomes kind of an internal truth. The last project is sort of the culmination of many of these ideas. We were fortunate enough to be able to participate in a competition. We were asked to develop a city for 150,000 people in the Middle East, and we were fascinated that this area had been recently destroyed. In many ways, what typically happens in a development project is a developer or a client tries to figure out what species are there, what could they get rid of. It happens here a lot, and if there is a problem, they try to mitigate it by doing certain things to move these species. We kind of took another approach. We took an approach of saying, what if we recreated the beautiful landscape landscape that was there, the beautiful nature, the ecosystem? What if we recreate the entire ecosystem that was destroyed in the last 30 years? And then in the process, through an acceleration of natural processes of tide, of wind, of sort of, in a very rapid way, rebuild what was destroyed, rebuild the ecosystem, and in doing so, really provide and focus on creating habitat for animals, for plants, for the flora and the fauna, and a very little portion of it, or at least the relationship of this, would be the built environment versus the recreated natural environment. And most of it was actually built on the mangrove. So in a way, we're recreating South Florida. And you know, I've worked on projects where the client's like, I want to rip out all this mangrove. I mean, many people, you buy a property, they're like, oh, you can't touch that mangrove, it's protected. And, you know, in the middle of the night, someone's like cutting the mangrove out. Here, we began to see how could we actually replant this mangrove? How could we repopulate based on this little ecosystem of creatures? You know, this is a dugong, but it's actually, you know, what we know as a manatee. So it's very fascinating to have similar nature in similar places. This is a very harsh desert environment, but has a very similar ecosystem to ours in terms of the water and the species around it. So this is what we were trying to build. It wasn't about the architecture, it wasn't about the experience of the city, it was about recreating the life that was destroyed by us. This is kind of the focus of what it was. And then in the process, creating the closest thing that I could think of to paradise, which is a wonderful natural environment that we can enjoy. So the idea is that, you know, we're building it for nature to thrive, but in turn, the best environment for nature to thrive is actually an environment for us as a species to thrive. So, you know, everyone talks about protecting nature. You know, nature's going to be fine. It's us that are going to have the problem. We need this habitat. We need more nature. And we hope that the way that we're creating this city will actually help people think about new ways of moving forward. That this is actually the beginning of a new development of civilization. It's not the old way of manipulating nature, controlling nature, but this is a way of actually rebuilding nature and creating a wonderful habitat for us as a species to thrive in. Here you can see some examples of houses and nature that we're creating, both in mangroves and reefs and beaches, and then the project at Sunset. So, you know, it's interesting, this is from the movie Avatar, you know, it's a common theme. We've exploited our planet. In this case, we're trying to exploit another planet for natural resources to use for our pleasure, to use in the growth of our civilization. But, you know, it's my feeling that we have the power to do anything. We've evolved to the place where we can do almost anything. And with this great power comes great responsibility, as our friend Peter Parker knows. And hopefully we can learn to balance what's good for the planet, which is good for us, and in turn actually do what's good for business. And, well, that's it. I don't know if there are any questions, thoughts, comments. Hendricks, do you have anything to say? Yeah.
How did you derive your philosophy with framing the views? Did you come up with that, or something you would learn? Like, how do you?
It's an interesting question. I think it comes from Donald Judd. In fact, I don't know if you know the artist Donald Judd. I was exposed to him at school. Someone showed me, but he creates these. I mean, he is no longer alive, but you should research him if you don't know him. But he created these sort of scaleless, very pure volumes, these rectangles mostly, and they're always kind of floating. Sometimes they're in a gallery, but he moved out to Marta, Texas, and he set these up in nature. And those actually inspired me a lot. Also the way that the Japanese, I spent time living in Japan, the way the Japanese frame, even in ancient architecture, like the shoji screens and these opening up of rooms to the garden, that idea of framing was definitely from studying Japanese gardens and architecture at school, as well as living there and kind of firsthand exploring them, which was interesting because I went in 1994 to live there for some months and traveled around the country, and then hadn't been back to about a year and a half ago when I went for work, and actually took my family as well there. We travel everywhere together. Hendrix actually turned 2 in Australia working on that site. But that idea of Japanese garden, Donald Judd, is very inspirational for me. Also another artist that has been inspirational to me, where I look at their work and I see architecture, is Richard Serra. And those wall suites that existed in Jordan were actually inspired by his work, where I can feel the architecture when I experience the work. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys went to Art Basel, it was in town. Yeah, I feel like art is a very good inspiration. For me, it's like art and nature, like somehow, and then the architecture somehow emerges from that. But I mean, I'm going around the fair, like, oh, that would be a cool building, or looking for ideas. I have like 20 pictures that I'm emailing people on projects we're working on currently, being like, hey, think about this, and email it. And then, that's where this inspiration comes from. Everything. I think you have to keep your mind open to many things. Any other clip? Yes.
And now that you've worked all over the world, how do you compare that experience of working outside and working in Florida?
It's interesting. There's, I guess, pros and cons to working everywhere. I could write probably. I was planning on writing a book about that, but I've been working on that for like 4 years, but haven't really had the time. Miami and South Florida is an interesting place to work. In the beginning, we were working for developers who were kind of new developers, because no experienced developer would hire us as a young architect. In fact, I even started by developing our own projects, finding investors and putting those projects together to show people that you could actually do kind of simple, elegant, cool design and actually make it successful as a business venture. But even to this day, I would say like most of the experienced developers of this area, we don't have as clients. It's kind of a curious thing. Working around the world, every culture has its unique idiosyncrasies. The Middle East, there's certain ways that, dreaming big, very exciting, but somewhat of, a limited experience because it's so new that they're doing these things. So they import a lot of knowledge from the West, actually from Australia, from England, very little from the United States. In China, where we're working, sometimes we're working for the Chinese, sometimes we're working for foreign companies in China, and the Chinese have their own way of working that is quite unique and quite curious. And one of the things that is fascinating, working here, it takes, let's say you're lucky, it's like 4 years, 5 years maybe to do a project from like that incredible idea to sitting in it. It's like amazing that it actually happens. In China, you'll be working on a project, they'll say, oh, send us some progress of where you are in like 2 weeks, and then literally a week later they'll send you construction pictures of the project under construction based on your like progress drawings. And I'm not talking like a house, I'm talking like 40 towers going up at once. But there's a lot lost in that as well. It's exciting if you can somehow control it, but it's also, I feel, a little bit kind of removed from the product because you're not there on site, you're not engaging, a lot of detail is lost because they just take your concept design and build it, or at least some of the projects that we're working on. So, there's little in Europe, in Switzerland, we have an office in Switzerland, and that's also very, very slow, very methodical. I mean, we've been working on a project for like 3 years and we still are in like concept design and client keeps like moving slow, you know. So everything has its pros and cons. And South Florida, we really don't have much work here, even though we're based here. We'd love to work more here, but for some reason, it's interesting. It's like for the experienced developers who are like more conservative, we're like too crazy. We're like very avant-garde and out there, even though we built very successful, simple buildings that are easy to build and very exciting. And then for the developers who are enlightened, they want to bring in like a star architect from outside, which is kind of funny because when we work outside, they feel like they're bringing in someone from the outside. So, you know, make a long story short, like I'd love to stay here and work more. There's really not much going on. I mean, little things. There are some big projects, but we don't have them, unfortunately. But, you know, we moved outside of Florida, not because we thought the area was going to collapse, even though it did, but because people saw what we did here and asked us to come to their place and kind of bring that sensibility. And many times they wanted us to bring, you know, that white, crisp, like Miami architecture that we were known for, and we kind of like always start from scratch and say like what's appropriate for this particular place. So, any other? Yeah.
I wonder about you're kind of tried to use the local materials places. At which point in your process are you able to do that research, you know, somewhere else so that you can find those cool materials early enough to integrate them into a design?
You know, we take some liberties. We say like, okay, we're going to use local stone. We may not even know exactly what it is, or we'll pick up something when we're going to visit the site. I think what's really critical is, for me obviously, is visiting the site. I mean, we try to, the first project, like go to the site. It's very rare that we don't visit the site because I get the sort of answers there. It's almost like, you ever seen a movie where like the Native Americans like, you know, listening to the land, you know, somehow like we get that experience. You know, Michael Bay was really impressed. He made us do a competition for his house, and because I was out there on site, like kind of feeling it, and I sketched something, and that actually became the house. Even though we studied like 30 options, that somehow was the one that was best. And every project goes through a very, very cathartic process. I mean, we do a lot of research. I mean, I'm showing you small fractions, like for instance, the last project, we literally have, you know, this many books from here to there on how to build that project with, you know, we had like 300 people working on it. Not in my office, we only have 30 people. At the time we had 50. But, you know, it's all about kind of exploring the place, learning from, I mean, in that area you may not be getting local stone from that particular place, but you might be getting it from the nearest place, which is within a couple of 100 miles or something like that. So, you know, sometimes there's great materials that are near you, and other times there are no materials. But even in the last project, there's not really many materials, or one of the last projects where the project was kind of built into these dunes. We just wanted to use what was there. And like in Jordan, we almost, in a way, like if it was up to me, I would have done everything carved out of the rocks. So in high school for architects and in summer for architects, and every architect was always like, you know, if I give you any advice, like don't be an architect. It was like sucks, you know. And a lot of these are like famous architects. And but you know, I think that advice is actually pretty true, even though I've never told them like don't do it. I would say like do it if you really love it, because you have to have the passion for it. It's not a profession where you can just kind of coast by. I mean, I think when I teach, which I haven't done recently, I've taught a couple semesters, I think I'm pretty tough on the students because, number one, if I'm teaching, it's like a big commitment for me to like be out of the office and like really you know, it takes away from what I need to do. I mean, it's not, I don't teach for the money, right? Like,
right.
There's easier ways to make money. But if someone's not trying, if someone doesn't care, I'm like, just like you're wasting my time. Like I have so limited time. I'm like, it's literally my days are choreographed to like the second, and everything is trying to squeeze in. So you really have to love it. You really have. It doesn't mean like you could. I'd prefer someone who doesn't necessarily have the talent, but they have like the passion and the desire, than someone who has or could have the talent and not the desire or the care to do it. So it's a very tough profession, and you have to love it. So if you don't love it, leave it. That's like I would say you have to really. I mean, I guess you could kind of, in a way, disappear into the world of architecture, and yeah, it's fun to draw and stuff like that. But I think you really have to love it to engage it.
Sure.
So, I mean, I kind of think of real estate agents. That kind of drives me crazy sometimes, and I'm friends with real estate agents. But just a case in point, like we design a building, right? And it takes us months to design it, sometimes a year, right? To design it, get it approved. We're exposed to literally millions and millions of dollars of liability, like people suing you for like nothing. Nothing you've even done, they'll just sue you. And like I have a crazy lawsuit right now because they said I said something in an interview to a paper that this building is going to be a luxury building, and then someone's suing me for like $15 million because they feel like the building wasn't as luxurious as I said it was. But so you're exposed to a lot of well, hopefully it's going to go away, but so I don't have $15 million. But nevertheless, you're exposed to a lot of mess, right? And here comes like a realtor, even not even like the head of a company, but some real estate agent, attractive guys and girls who are like, strutting around in there. And those people, within an hour, I mean, this is like in the heyday, could make like more than our firm with a team of like 5 people working on a project for like 3 years. And that's why like you have to love what you do, because it's a very hard profession. It's not a very lucrative profession. It can be lucrative, and we've done very well, thankfully. But it's a struggle every day. Even when times are good, it was a struggle. It's a struggle. Like today was a huge struggle. I mean, it's like a never-ending struggle. So you have to love it. You have to want to do it. Sorry if you're going to quit architecture.
Yeah, you're not doing too good for my marketing, but it's okay. I think it's
I'd rather you get fewer students who like really love it than more. No, but
it definitely
it's also the most. I mean, I couldn't do anything else. It's like I love architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could not do anything else. So to me, it's the best profession, but it's a very difficult profession.
Yeah.
So I think I'm not in the school of saying like get out. I'm like in the school of like saying it's awesome, but it's also challenging, and there are rewards, of course. But to me, it's almost a miracle that anything ever gets built. Like when you're in school, you're like, oh, I'm going to do one of those. Like all these art. I'm in school like, oh, I can't wait. I'm going to be building all these buildings, and you're very kind of naive. And in a way, I thought, even after like I started my business, which was never even really intended. I just kind of left the firm I was working on. I had a couple small projects, and I was just like surging ahead, like, we'll build this. We started building, and we started doing projects. And it's funny, like now after 10, 12 years, I'm like even more intimidated by the process, even though I've done it for that long. And I'm realizing, like, how the hell does like anything ever get built? And it's almost in a way like trying to have a child, right? Like you're in high school and college, you're like, oh my God, I hope like you don't have a child, like because you're not ready yet. And then like when you want it, you think it's so easy. And when you want to have a child, it's like, oh wow, this is like a miracle. Like it really is a miracle to have a child, which in fact are beyond all this. And this is nothing. I mean that you never met my daughter, but those are my greatest creations. So it is like birth. it's a miracle that anything gets built. But it's also very, very exciting. So, yeah.
Good advice.
I don't know,
Thank
do we
you.
have any other closing questions that are more uplifting?
Christian, you want to say something?
Oh my God, look at that. Now we're ending on a high note. Great, thank you so much. Great.
And thank
Great,
you everyone
thank
for coming out. And our last event's next Wednesday. It's the Architect.
What does that mean?
All designs, design 1 through 4, will be presenting their final.
Oh, I'd love to come, but I have an appointment with the Queen of Qatar, maybe. She won't tell me when. I'm sort of waiting here for the appointment. Hopefully she'll let me know. It's not around the corner.
You can bring her if you want.
Yeah, it'd be a lot easier if she came here. I guess she has her own plane.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately.
There's an airport right here.
I know, I saw that. It's like you can commute.
Pretty easy.
Great, we can hitch a ride. Well, thank you guys. I hope
Thanks.
you're,
Thank you very much.